On behalf of the Graduate School, I'm delighted to welcome you to this special seminar, The Science of Effective Mentorship in STEM, with our guest speaker, Maria Lund-Dahlberg, Director of the Board of Higher Education and Workforce at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, or as we know them, NASEM. In all of Grad Future's professional development programs, we consistently advise graduate students about the importance of cultivating a broad network of mentors, sponsors, and collaborators. Mentorship, as we all know, is integral to delivering on the promise of graduate education and to success throughout one's career. We're so grateful to NASEM for their work in systematically compiling and analyzing research related to the characteristics, competencies, and behaviors of effective mentors and mentees in STEM. And we're very much looking forward to hearing more about the findings from the 2019 The Science of Effective Mentorship in STEM report, as well as learning more about NASEM's new Roundtable on mentorship, well-being, and professional development and scientific research, which focuses on the role of identity, inclusion, personal agency, and well-being in mentorship relationships and the professional development of graduate students and postdoctoral scholars in STEM. Our audience today includes Princeton's graduate students, postdocs, faculty, and graduate school colleagues, as well as many graduate alums in our Grad Futures Alum Mentorship Program who are participating online. We are also pleased to welcome faculty and students in Princeton's Alliance for Collaborative Research and Innovation Program, also known as PACRI, run by Princeton's Dean for Research Office, who are also attending online. So there's several of us here who will be attending a reception upstairs, and some folks online who will miss the reception afterwards, who will be with us in spirit, however. Many of our graduate alums in the Alum Mentorship Program know all too well what it's like to mentor during the pandemic and having to mentor solely in an online environment. Maria and I were just having a sort of brief conversation about perhaps the differences between in-person mentorship and mentorship in a virtual environment. So hopefully we can touch a little bit on that as well. Before we begin, I also want to thank our colleagues in the Office for the Dean of Research, particularly Kelly Friedenfeld, who's with us today, for her partnership in hosting NASEM colleagues, both Maria and Melissa when at Princeton. In addition to this seminar this evening, Maria and Melissa will also be engaging in additional discussions with faculty and departments across campus tomorrow, and Kelly, I know, will be their host. A big thank you as well to Grad Future's Assistant Dean Sonali Majumdar, who was not able to be with us today, but who was integral in spearheading this connection with NASEM and in coordinating this event. Immediately following the talk, we will welcome all of you to submit questions. My colleague Amanda Peacock here will help moderate questions from the audience online, and I'll be moderating in person. I mentioned the reception immediately after we wrap up with Q&A. We will head upstairs to the atrium for a lovely reception where I'm sure you will pepper Maria with additional questions. With that, please join me in welcoming Maria Lund-Dahlberg.
Thank you so much, Eva. Yes, thank you. And I'm hoping that all technology works. So let's please get started. Yes, my name is Maria Lund-Dahlberg. For reference, I use they, them pronouns, and I would definitely like to thank Sonali and Eva and the rest of Grad Futures for inviting me to speak here tonight. I had the honor of serving as the study director for the Science of Effective Mentorship in STEM project that we released back in October of 2019. And I also have since led several projects that built on that work throughout the National Academies in the past half decade or so. Tonight, I would like to frame my talk around three main questions, and I'm going to touch on them in different sort of levels of engagement. And first, of course, is, what is the science of mentorship? How can we develop and incorporate effective mentorship competencies, particularly around accounting for differences in identities for those who are involved in mentoring relationships? And then how do we build a culture of mentorship? So let's see if I can get both things to move forward. So starting off, what is the science of mentorship? When we first started off in this space about 7 years ago now, Dr. Angela Byers-Winston, who was a member of the Board on Higher Education and Workforce, suggested that we do a study on effective mentorship and the science of effective mentorship in STEM. And one of our fellow board members raised their hand and said, okay, yeah, but don't you mean mentorship in science, not science of mentorship? And yes, that is what she meant, but she did also mean actual science of mentorship, digging into what we know about how people interact, how they learn and grow with and from each other. And that question, though, really sparked something in Dr. Byers-Winston's brain and in mine, and it made us wanted to do that study even more. So the report that we're going to be talking about today is based on a whole range of different disciplinary perspectives. It brings together these intellectual and practical activities. It helps inform the systematic study and provide guidance on effective behaviors, mentoring tools, and possible structures of mentoring relationships, and a whole bunch more. But it leads perhaps to an even more fundamental question, and that is, what do we mean by mentorship? It seems like every paper that you might pick up, that you do a Google search on the word mentorship, has its own definition to start it off with. The committee read a bunch of these, dug into their own research, and developed this one that you see on the screen behind me. Mentorship is a professional working alliance in which individuals work together over time to support the personal and professional growth, development, and success of the relational partners through the provision of career and psychosocial support. And there's 3 really key elements in that definition that I want to highlight. First of all, it's based around a concept of a working alliance. That means it's mutually setting goals and expectations together. Second, we use the phrase relational partners. There's no mention in this definition of it being a unidirectional relationship or of it only involving 2 people. There's actually no definition of how many people are involved at all in this. And finally, it includes career and psychosocial support functions. Mentorship has many different overlapping features with other forms of developmental relationships like teaching, coaching, advising, supervising, but none of those specifically fit into the definition provided here. All of them, though, are still very important. And why is it important that we even start digging into this and defining it itself? Well, around the time that this report was released, there were some top-line numbers that we also pulled together. A survey of approximately just under 21,000 full-time undergraduate teaching faculty at 143 four-year institutions was conducted in 2019 by the Higher Education Research Institute. And that, along with some information that Gallup surveys also conducted in 2018, lets us know that around 80%, 79% of faculty preparing students for the workplace, or think that preparing students for the workplace is the high or the highest priority. But only 7% had mentor training. A lack of faculty development in this space, a lack of access or initiative. Less than 48% of faculty say they think their institution takes this seriously. And only 22% of students, of STEM undergraduate students, say that they felt like they had a mentor. So the report itself is pretty great. It includes numbers like that, but it has a whole bunch of other stuff. It is really, really long. It's a textbook. It's a great textbook. I encourage you to read it, but I don't expect you to. It's got literature, it's got theories, got approaches and programs, and it's got all sorts of different ways that we can help support effective mentoring relationship in STEM. I don't expect to go through it all right tonight. Instead, I'm going to give you my 4 takeaway messages right now. And I'm putting them up here so that you will at least have those 4 takeaway messages with you. Now I'm going to go through them because that's how talks are done. So the first highlight from the report is to recognize that mentorship happens within an ecosystem. It occurs within nestled contexts, and understanding how those contexts interact with each other is important. Scholars like Dr. Barunda Montgomery have described the individuals who are being mentored as being influenced by the various forms of proximal mentoring relationships they have, be they the mentoring dyads or individual relationships. And those relationships are influenced by the institutional context in which their research training is occurring. You could think of the environment of a given laboratory or the department or their training program that they're engaged with. That can shape how those individual relationships are developing and happening. At the interinstitutional context, that sort of like seafoam green color, that's like the NIH policies, grants like their, say, an R25 pre-doctoral program, right? Or what influence you're receiving at a disciplinary society. Fellowships that will influence how the mentoring relationships expectations are developed. And then finally, we can't deny the import of societal and cultural context, different trends that are happening all around us. We're not isolated here within our laboratories or our departments. Historic events like an economic downturn is going to affect how we shape our career development, our personal development, and our mentoring relationships. The second big message from the report is that mentorship is a learned skill. Some people might have just like an innate ability, a natural skill for it. And some people might seem to like flounder when they get into these relationships. But everybody, all current potential long-term mentors can grow their skills and their competencies. Mentorship involves several different forms of competencies as well. It's not just one thing that you can do. In the committee, when they were writing the report, they identified several different forms of competencies. A couple of them I've put up here, several key ones. If you spoke with me so far, you've already heard several of these. The development of trust. It forms over time. It forms through a mutual process. It can't just be thrown into the relationship and said, poof, now it's trustworthy. It has to respond to the needs and the goals and the changing expectations of everybody who's involved in the relationship. Then there's self-reflection that happens on the part of the mentors as well as the part of the mentees. It's really hard to do self-reflection critically, but you have to do it, and you have to do it repeatedly throughout the course of the relationship. And then setting explicit expectations, which can be a little uncomfortable sometimes. But preferably you do it early on in the relationship. Preferably you do it in writing. And then you can revisit it periodically throughout the relationship and figure out how to develop it further. The development of mentorship competencies can be boosted by participation in mentorship education because mentorship is a learned skill. Perhaps one of the strongest findings of the report is that the combination of effectiveness of mentorship education and that current 7% lack of implementation of those same programs means that there is an opportunity for dramatic improvement in the effectiveness of mentorships. There are several different curricula that are available for mentors and for mentees to develop your skill sets. Many of these curricula were developed by scholars at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, like Chris Fund and Dr. Angela Byers-Winston, and the Universities of Minnesota and Rochester. There's strong evidence, moreover, that mentors who participate in at least 4 hours, only 4, of mentorship education report higher mentoring effectiveness, and their mentees rate them more favorably than those with less or no mentorship education. It only takes 4 hours. Moreover, these curricula are actually free. They're freely available at the Simmer Project website or on the NIH-sponsored National Research Mentoring Network, or NRMN, and they can be customized by discipline and career stage and downloaded into PDFs that you can distribute. The third highlight that I want to talk about is the intersection of mentorship and identities. But first, I need a drink. It is really important to recognize and respond to cultural identities in order to have effective mentoring relationships. Mentorship is, by and large, a social relationship. In such, identity, which we define as the composite of who a person is, the way they think about themselves, the way they are viewed by the world, and the characteristics they use to define themselves. Identity plays a pivotal role. Certain aspects of identity, like science identity, cultural identities, have been empirically linked to career development in STEM. Students with identities that are not well represented in STEM can feel othered or isolated. Sometimes they feel the need to check themselves at the door, as they say. And culturally responsive mentorship practices can increase feelings of inclusion. Just like any other mentorship competency, culturally responsive mentorship is a set of skills and can be learned. And all mentors can and should learn it, regardless of their race or gender. As Angela Byers-Winston likes to say, nobody is off the hook. Effective mentorship is, by definition, a culturally responsive practice. It has positive correlations with career and education outcomes. By engaging and affirming cultural identities along with people's STEM identities, mentees can bring their whole identities into the laboratories and research environments. They may experience less of something called identity interference, where the performance or display of one identity is understood to interfere with the performance of another identity. They feel like they need to choose who they are within a certain space. Identity interference can result in lower academic performance, depression, and reduced psychological well-being. Now, there are situations where culturally responsive mentorship is not available. In these situations, the report talks about and recommends online affinity groups and conferences that can provide a mechanism for support. The fourth and final takeaway message from the report is the importance of acknowledging power dynamics and the role that power dynamics can play in mentoring relationships. Even in the most fantastic, engaged, and wonderful mentoring relationship, there are still power dynamics. That screen went off. So on the screen here, you see the traditional hierarchical dyad that most people think of when you think of a mentoring relationship, right? The mentee and their career progression and development is dependent on one person, the mentor. And really, like any system with a single point of failure is not a great idea. We try and develop all of our systems to have more than one point of failure. Now, moreover, and especially when we're thinking about research settings, there tends to be this focus on career support functions, right? How should I write my next grant? Or who do I need to contact at that next professional society meeting? Or what experiment should I take on next? Or if I'm really lucky, my advisor is talking about my work when I'm not around through a form of sponsorship mentoring. But it often ignores that critical piece of psychosocial support. Now, this means that what we think of or refer to as mentorship is actually advising. It doesn't even meet our full definition of mentorship. And while it's really important, these two should not be conflated and do not provide everything that you need. And moreover, what happens if a mentee has no person they can turn to if they need psychosocial support, or if they face significant disruptions in their lives, or even if they face not so significant disruptions in their lives? They're going to that professional society meeting, and they're not exactly sure what they should be wearing. This type of structure also assumes trust. It forces interpersonal dynamics which don't necessarily exist. Trust, as I mentioned before, is one of those fundamental elements of effective mentorship. But it's something that can be developed and needs to be developed over time. Participants in a mentoring relationship should have an expectation of privacy, not just about what is discussed within the relationship, that it's not going to be shared widely, but also about what they are expected to discuss. There shouldn't be an assumption that they are going to have to share everything. And by and large, when you have these kinds of power dynamics at play, the onus is going to be on the person with more power to create the space for trust and to earn the trust. Now, most mentoring relationships are not dyads. They're not limited to that traditional dyadic structure. Rather, there's a whole different range of structures, right? Some are dyadic, but more often they have that sort of bilateral dyad going on. They're not hierarchical in the same sense as I put on the previous slides. There are sometimes triadic structures where you have two mentors and mentoring the same mentee, or two mentees sharing the same mentor and also mentoring each other. Or you can have collective or group mentoring, where you have multiple mentees, multiple mentors, and they're all sort of sharing knowledge and skills and development and support among each other. To help mitigate and navigate those power dynamics within mentoring structures, you can use various tools like IDPs or mentoring compacts or mentoring maps. They're particularly useful when you're thinking about self-reflection, boundary and expectation setting, and identifying what your mentoring needs might be. So very briefly, in case you are unaware, IDPs or individual development plans, they help you lay out your own personal goals, help you do some self-reflection, figure out what you might need. They also are really useful if you're about to have a difficult conversation with your mentor. A compact or an agreement is developed between all of the members of your mentoring relationship, and they should lay out fairly explicitly what are the expectations, what are the boundaries, how often are we going to meet? Is my mentor also going to help me figure out how I can do work on the weekends, or are they only going to be available on weekdays themselves? Are they going to just give me advice on my next poster, or are they going to help me look for postdocs as well? Mentoring plans lay out the approaches that mentors tend to take. So they're for your mentors to figure out, what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? And mentoring maps, which is this cartoon that I've got on this, help mentees figure out what are the resources they need? Who do I need to contact? What kind of ideas are I going to need to fill in order to develop more fully? As your mentoring relationships change and develop, and they will over time, they will change, it's useful to return to these various tools and just make sure everything's on track. See how things have shifted, determine what might need to be altered or adjusted as things evolve. All right, let's see if that keeps going. So that was a lot of me talking about what mentorship is and a little bit about what you might want to keep in mind through your mentoring relationships. But as happens in National Academies reports, we also laid out a whole bunch of different recommendations. These recommendations were based on the research at the time and the evidence that was available on how to create cultures of effective mentorship throughout that ecosystem. We didn't quite get to the final outer layer of the culture and like entirety of the United States, but we got to several others. And each recommendation came with sub-recommendations for the different members of the ecosystem. The first recommendation that we put forward, though, was to adopt a definition of mentorship. We didn't say that it had to be our definition of mentorship, although that one's based on the evidence and we recommend it and we think that it's a great one. But what is the mentorship that is right for Princeton? What is right for your environment? What are you going to be measuring against? How are you going to define mentorship so that you know moving forward what you are aiming towards? Second, use evidence-based approaches. There are good ideas that are out there that have been tested, that have been engaged. Use mentorship tools, mentorship education. Use some assessments that have been validated. Set clear expectations. Much of what I've already spoken about today should be encouraged by your leadership and by various participants in those mentoring relationships. I put on this slide here a couple of examples from the sub-bullets, right? Mentees should equate themselves with evidence-based tools and strategies, including compacts, IDPs, mentor maps, mentor accountability systems. When possible, mentees should take advantage of any mentee-focused mentorship education and resources and be aware of which faculty members in their program, department, and institutions have participated in mentorship education and which faculty use evidence-based mentorship tools. And then applaud them for it, which isn't in the report. But what can I say? I think it's okay. Recommendation 3 is around the use of implementation of feedback and metrics, because we don't know what we're doing if we don't actually pay attention to what we're doing. Assessments and evaluation through structured systems can reduce unintentional bias and also can help protect mentees. Institutions and departments, particularly their leadership, should regularly and systematically review formal mentorship activities and programs and support development of mentorship skills and student success and well-being. These reviews could include different stakeholder groups to check for alignment with stated program goals and missions, ensure that practices for effective mentorship are incorporated throughout activities and programs, and create a culture of accountability where possible. I mentioned identities as being a fundamental part of mentoring relationships. Identities influence academic and career development and are a significant part of mentoring relationships. In creating a culture of effective mentorship, therefore, all members of the ecosystem should recognize the influence and importance of identities. Professional associations. They can intentionally address socio-demographic factors in mentoring relationships, specifically for mentorship of underrepresented mentees. Professional associations should also intentionally create cultures of inclusive excellence to improve the quality and relevance of the STEM enterprise. It is unreasonable to assume that multiple mentorship doesn't exist and it's not occurring all around you. Moreover, it's unreasonable to assume that one person can provide all of the mentorship that is needed to any particular mentee. Therefore, multiple mentorship is happening and should be supported, whether that is from institutional leadership or professional societies or the mentees and mentors themselves. And while this might seem relatively straightforward, it can be pretty difficult to figure out how exactly to do this, and can take a little bit of a hump to get over for some mentees and some mentors to reach out to others and engage them in their mentoring relationships. Significantly easier to say as well than to do is rewarding effective mentorship. Effective mentorship needs, though, to be rewarded, recognized, and incentivized. Often, the easiest one to point to is the idea at the department level of using promotion and tenure, performance appraisal practices, and others to reward your effective mentoring. I could go through a list of various ways that we've thought about to include this in promotion and tenure, but I'm not going to. If you have a question, I'd be happy to talk about it. I haven't mentioned this much yet, but negative mentoring experiences happen, and they can be horribly disruptive, discouraging. They can even be destructive to a particular relationship, to a mentee's career development. They can even destroy entire mentoring ecosystems. At the time of the report, I'll note the evidence and research on negative mentoring experiences was actually relatively limited, surprisingly. But we did speak to several key aspects of what was known around negative mentoring experiences at the time. In our recommendation, we focused primarily on ideas around prevention and direct mitigation immediately afterwards. It's important to build the mentorship skills through mentorship education, for example, to help prevent or reduce negative mentoring experiences. But even then, it might not do, even then, negative mentoring experiences can and do occur. They aren't always intentional. And it's something important to keep in mind. Some people with very good intentions still cause negative mentoring experiences. And some people don't try everything they can to be having positive experiences and are still just having a mismatch, and it results in a bad mentorship. So it is important to normalize systems that will address this. so that people feel that they have recourse and they have a way to find a path out of these bad relationships. Importantly, mentors should recognize that negative mentoring experiences can occur even with well-intentioned mentors and mentoring practices, and be open to these unintended mentoring experiences and engaging and figuring out how to move forward, probably with a neutral third party. All right, so there's a lot more. As was mentioned, we created an online guide, which is a lot easier to read than the tome. It's available at nas.edu/mentoring, along with several other resources. It's a lot of information that is available. I encourage you to go to this website and browse. As a quick preview, you can see this navigation bar. We also put together a podcast because COVID happened and we couldn't do tours like this. So instead, we brought the tour to you. We have 2 seasons of that podcast. First season has mentors. Second season has mentees, graduate students and postdocs talking about their experiences. And the online guide itself covers a fair share of what is actually in the report in shortened form, and a lot of what I talked about today as well. Thanks again for having me, for listening, and for letting me share some of what we pulled together in the report. I believe this is the time when I take questions.
So for the Q&A portion, we are going to use the microphone because we're recording this and there's people on Zoom. So I'm going to pass around. I have 2 mics. So if like one on that side of the room, one on this side of the room. But does anybody want to start? And does anybody have any questions?
Hi, Gary Christensen, an alum from here. I thought I'd been a mentor, but given your definition, maybe I haven't been a mentor to many people. But in my experience with helping in whatever way I've helped other people, I have found that many don't actually understand their identity. And so a lot of my, especially early interactions, me asking questions and getting them to verbalize their values. And for many of them, it's the first time they've ever done that. And in that way, they normally answer their own questions. But I've also sensed there's a lack of what I'll call people skill education in STEM education. And so the faculty who you would hope would be mentoring, they've never really been trained. So, how much have they developed general people skills? Like one of the talks I give is ask better questions. And right. When I've talked about values, I had a junior faculty come up to me and say, I wish I'd heard this talk before I went into academia. So how do you feel that the higher level of people skill in general education is contributing to the mentoring problem?
So, one, I think the difficulty with self-reflection is a key component in understanding why a lot of negative mentoring experiences or the mismatch that happens in mentoring occurs, right? I know that was the case with my mentoring experience, right? I had some of you guys have heard this story, and I'm sorry, this is like the 4th time you're hearing it. I had a mentor in grad school, and he was a fine mentor for other people, but I gave him what I thought he wanted to hear, which was not actually what I needed. But I didn't have the skill set yet to do that self-reflection to figure out what I wanted. And by the time I had finally done all that work for myself, I was like 6.5 years in, and so I dropped out and got my job. But it was a really tough conversation to have. And I think we don't necessarily always give credit to our mentees for the difficulty of that level of conversation, for the difficulty of trying to figure out, I don't necessarily know. I know that this sounded really cool, so I applied and I got in and now I'm doing it, but I don't know what that means. But as we're finding out with more and more research into these mentorship competencies, that guidance, that psychosocial engagement, that ability to help your mentees think as a mentor is a learnable skill. And if your particular mentor is not willing to help, you might be able to find somebody else who will just ask you that particular set of questions. Now, you said you didn't mentor, you didn't think you mentored by my particular definition. The ratio doesn't have to be 50-50, but there has to be an acknowledgement of where you're falling. Are you only giving career advice? Because then maybe you're not being a full mentor. Are you only giving psychosocial support? Maybe you're just a friend. Are you giving some mixture of the two? Are you giving psychosocial support towards career development? Then I think that's still mentorship. And there's a little bit there's a little bit of a give and take in that system about how does that really hold together.
Next question.
Hi, thank you for a little bit of feedback. Thanks for a great talk. Kind of piggybacking off of that, how do you view being a mentor of multiple sets versus having different mentors for different needs? Is like your comment there, right? Not just be just not on the social component, but also career or other things versus, having a mentor who's more specialized in one area. And I know curating more voices might be more challenging, but it also gives you more voices.
I am 100% behind having more than one mentor. I think that most people will benefit from hearing more than one perspective on any given question or comment, and more exactly, it is unlikely that you will be able to find one person who can advise you on every aspect or engage you on every aspect of your life. So get lots of mentors, as many as you feel is appropriate and comfortable. Now, maybe there's a point in your life where you only have one mentor for a little while, but I don't think it's going to last very long. And frankly, right, if you happen to find that one unicorn mentor, likely other people have found them as well, and they're probably pretty exhausted. So I doubt that you're going to be able to get much out of them. And if you do, they're probably going to burn out pretty quickly. And maybe the NIH is going to get really angry because they're not actually going to be able to write their next grant. But I think there's also an element sort of on the flip side, which is actually where I thought your question was going to go, which is as a mentor, if you are mentoring a whole bunch of other people, are you doing the same mentorship for everybody? Or are you figuring out, this person I'm going to be this kind of mentor, and this person I'm going to be that kind of mentor? And I think that's a question that you have to think about as you're developing your own mentoring plan, your own mentoring engagement idea is, am I this kind of mentor across everybody? And I always give this kind of, obviously you're not going to give the same advice to everybody, but like, am I always going to be the person who can make people's posters awesome? Maybe that is what you are, but maybe, for like your lab, that's who you are for a mentor, but you also have mentees that are in different, you're more psychosocial mentees who you go out and you have coffee with. And I would note that every relationship of mentoring is going to have some sort of bi-directional engagement, multi-directional engagement. and you'll probably get something interesting out of it as a mentor. You're going to be learning from your mentees. They'll be teaching you something, even if you think it is unidirectional. So if you only do one thing, you're probably really limiting yourself, and I'm kind of pitying you.
Yeah, again, thank you for the talk. It was really great. I was wondering if you had any kind of advice or maybe suggested resources for kind of framing that kind of like initial mentoring compact goal setting exercise. Because I tried to do something very quickly for that for a peer mentorship program, but I think I had a set of mentors and mentees who were sort of unfamiliar with doing that kind of like explicit self-reflection on what they wanted out of the program. So I got a lot of blank stares when I asked people to write down their goals.
So under that tab on the online guide, there's a tab, Action and Tools Mentoring. There is a link, or there should be, and I hope they're still active. I apologize, we don't actually update this very often. But there is a link to various sorts of IDPs for different groups. I think there's some example compacts, there's example mentoring maps, some mentoring plans. You can take a look. They link out to other sites. So if you can't find them, like the URLs are broken, try Google searches. Also, I can give you my card and we can do stuff. Otherwise, CIMER, CIMER, pardon guys. There we go. Center for Improvement in Mentor Research Experiences and Research. They have a number of resources available as well. I applaud you for trying to figure out tools. Examples are great. They're always lovely. One of the colleagues that helped write this report, with our committee, Dr. Kevin Stason, he's at Vanderbilt. He does an exercise where he writes, he has a list of things he expects his mentees will think of from a PI research advisor mentor. And he's categorized them into 3 buckets, sort of a red light, green light, yellow light activity. And the green light ones are the ones that he's like, I do this for everybody as a mentor. I will always provide you with these sorts of supports. And the red light ones are ones he's like, look, I'm just not going to do that. It's just not my wheelhouse. If you want this, I will look, I might help you try and find somebody else. And the yellow ones are ones he's like, if it's something you really want, we can negotiate. And so he's set that up and he provides that to them. And then they come in and they can do a similar sort of thing from their end. And they look to see how much of the overlap there is. And that designs their compact. Everything that is the overlap in the greens, that's part of the thing. Anything that's in the various yellows, they figure it out. If a mentee comes in and there's like, 6 things in their green list that fall into his red list, they have a serious conversation about whether that's going to be a functional relationship. But it makes it pretty clear. And if you do it beforehand, it's not anybody's fault, right?
Hi, thank you for your talk. This is Mo. I'm a postdoc here. So one thing we have been trying to, I think we mentioned our discussion earlier, but try to have maybe a formal kind of additional mentorship to establish for the postdocs at least, since the grad students would have a committee, so maybe those serve as mentors. But I think one kind of pushback we had was the faculty time is very limited, which is very true. And the other concern from some faculty was, I guess, or to try to establish it, was the question was, what was the selling point, or what do faculty get in return since they're not in their lab and it's more of time commitment than besides other things. So I'm wondering if first, if this notion is true that there should be something in return for those additional mentors or not? And if it's true, how do you think if there isn't a formal path to do that, how would we, I guess, seek additional mentorship if they're faculty, I guess, since.
So you would be asking faculty A to provide a formal mentorship to postdoc in faculty B's laboratory?
Yes. Or even if you're doing informally, right? Should I think that I should be thinking what do they get in return, or actually this shouldn't be part of the question here? I don't know if there's research or your thoughts on this.
So, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of people do still think in this sort of give and take, time is a zero-sum game sort of way. I would say there are several benefits to mentors in terms of being mentee, in terms of taking on mentees, right? Particularly if you're talking about mentoring people who are already at the postdoctoral level, right? If it's a close enough field or a related field, there's a possibility of developing collaborations, learning new skill sets from your postdocs. Creative thinking and engagement comes from diversity of thought. So suddenly you're engaging a whole new line of individuals who you may not have otherwise had exposure to. You, I hope, as postdocs are not going to stay postdocs forever. So you're about to go off to a completely different institution. You suddenly made a connection that is a collaborative connection moving forward. It's not probably going to be a mentorship relationship there. It's going to be collaborators, right? So developing these relationships is potential to be a really fantastic way. If it's early career faculty that you're trying to engage in this space, it's a way for them to improve and engage and develop and think about what their mentorship skills might look like, without necessarily destroying undergraduates' hopes and dreams in STEM, because you've already established some of your hopes and dreams in STEM. I think that there is a little bit of an extra safety feature. And it also depends on what you as postdocs are hoping to get out of that mentoring program, right? Are you looking to develop your mentoring skills? Are you looking to develop your scientific skills? Are you looking to develop your science networking skills? What are the purposes that you want to get out of it as well? Just, I want a mentoring program is pretty open-ended. So there are ways to think about this, but I don't think it's a non-starter. I think it has to be, think about what is important to the people that you are working with. And if you don't know, ask. Other
Hi, thanks so much. It was so interesting to hear the presentation. So like we mentioned earlier, I'm coming from a humanities social science perspective, so I'm interested in thinking about the university as a whole. And I was curious if in this initial report or the ongoing work, if there was looking at any kind of like centralization efforts at the across the university level. Like I work with a music mentoring program, and there are other peer mentoring programs all across the university. And I was curious if there have been looking at any kind of how the different centralization efforts might bolster that kind of mentoring that we're talking about here. Like, for example, I think you mentioned Vanderbilt earlier. I think that their Center for Teaching and Learning includes mentorship as a core facet of that program. Whereas here we have the Center of Teaching and Learning specifically. So I was curious if at the places where there are at least some version of centralization efforts, if that is correlated with improved support for mentees or mentors, or what thoughts you might have on that.
Man, I wish that these efforts have been around long enough. A lot of them are pretty nascent. So I know, yeah, mentorship is being incorporated in Vanderbilt. It's being incorporated in University of Wisconsin-Madison. There's University of Wisconsin-Madison Center for Teaching and Learning is now the Center for Teaching and Learning and Mentorship. It's in the name now. So I think 10-ish years ago, we started getting more and more professional development centers for graduate students. And now we're starting to see a similar trend in terms of central systems, central learning centers and development centers for mentoring. 25 to 30 years ago was when we started seeing the centers for teaching and learning pop up across campuses. And I would not be surprised if in institutions where that has a central institutionally backed initiative, there is a broader engagement and more generalized support for effective mentoring practices, but I don't think we have the data or research to back that up yet. So keep your eye out.